In front of us today is a classic, and that is the exotic auto rifle Khvostov. I would argue and say that this is probably the most iconic weapon in Destiny. It's the first weapon that a Guardian starts with, and even back at D1 we had an exotic version, which was like this weird hybrid of like every single archetype you could think of. Personally, I thought the exotic version back at D1 really wasn't that good, but Bungie has brought it back to us here in D2, and it is way different than its D1 exotic variant. Now, some basics out of the way, this is a 600 round per minute auto rifle, placing it in that adaptive frame archetype. And something clever that Bungie has done here with Khvostov is made everything center around the number 7. You see, its exotic trait has a ricochet effect every 7th bullet, and its other exotic perk increases that ricochet effect and can stack up to 7 times. Hell, it even has its stats have the number 7 everywhere: 47 range, 47 stability, 71 handling, 79 reload, 87 aim assist, 17 zoom, 27 airborne effectiveness, and 97 recoil direction. This thing is riddled with 7s. Now, a lot of folks speculated that this was going to be a craftable exotic, but as you see here, at least from this variant that we got to play with, this is not craftable, which I'm all right with. Because let's just be real, this version of Khvostov is extremely unique. Now, starting with our perks, we have the intrinsic exotic trait, the right choice, which reads, every 7th bullet from this weapon deals additional damage and ricochets to nearby targets. Its secondary exotic perk is called Eyes Up Guardian. What a callback, right? This one reads that collecting orbs of power strengthens this weapon's next several ricochet shots, providing more damage and more bounces between targets. Now, that's not everything that Khvostov has to offer. We also have another perk on this, and that's actually shoot to loot. Shooting an orb of power picks it up. Shooting an ammo brick picks it up and automatically reloads all your equipped weapons from reserves. Now, this kind of plays into the role of picking up an orb. You know, a lot of this gameplay here, I'm physically going to pick up the orbs. Considering the weapon greatly strengthens itself upon picking up that orb of power, this synergizes beautifully with shoot the loot, as you can just essentially shoot the orbs, as well as shoot ammo if you want. Now, in terms of other perks, we have Hammer Forged Rifling as our barrel perk, Alloy Magazine for our mag perk, giving us that 0.85 reload duration multiplier when your mag is empty, and we also have Composite Stock for that +5 stability and +5 handling, which of course helps round out that 7 number in our stats. Now, I know, most of you are probably like, Cross, just give it to me, man. How good is that ricochet effect? Now, this one's pretty interesting. You see, the right choice perk allows every 7th bullet from this weapon to deal additional damage and will then ricochet to nearby targets. Now, we did our testing here at Grasp of Avarice, and against red bar enemies at base, we're dealing 1,614 damage to the body and 2,516 damage to the head. Now, when that 7th bullet activates, giving us that increase in damage, this jumps things up substantially. Its body shot damage goes up to 5,690. We're talking a 252% increase in damage. And then for our crits, this jumps up to 8,869 damage. So still that same 252% increase, but these are substantial jumps. Now, at this point, the bullet would then ricochet to nearby targets, which in our testing was showing 6,063 damage if it ricochets to the body, which again is another 275 increase over base, and then a massive 12,185 damage if the ricochet hits a crit, which is a whopping 384% increase in damage. Now, I do want to mention that a lot of this footage, I'm literally just shooting these weapons over and over, just kind of getting a feel for them on the fly. And then after the capture event, then we can go back through the footage. So a lot of this is like I'm looking back and also remembering when I played with the weapon. But there is a lot of things that are happening here that we have to just slow down to kind of take a look. But based on our footage here, at base, this seems to only ricochet twice. Another thing to note is that the increased damage that the 7th bullet gets can be affected by damage fall off, but it seems the ricochet shot itself will keep its full damage even if outside of range. Now, the secondary exotic perk is where things get a little weird, at least from the footage we have here. Again, it states that collecting orbs of power strengthens this weapon's next several ricochet shots, and it says it provides more damage and more bounces between targets. Now, once a single orb of power is picked up right above your super meter, you'll see it right there, guys. It'll say Eyes Up Guardian ×7. And each time a ricochet round is shot, that being procced, that charge will decrease down to 6 and then down to 5 until you run out or until you pick up another orb to then get you back up to 7 stacks. Now, while Eyes Up Guardian is procced, this seems to allow your bullet to ricochet 7 times per activation, which makes sense given the whole theme of this exotic. Now, the part I don't really understand is the extra damage part. You see, I wasn't really noticing any extra damage when that bullet ricochets enemies, and I had Eyes Up Guardian procced, it was still dealing the same 6,603 to the body when it would ricochet. I think that maybe it can't land that massive ricochet crit if you don't have Eyes Up Guardian procced, but that isn't the case either, as I have footage showing me dealing that 12,185 crit damage without the perk even being procced. So I'm not sure what that part of the description is supposed to mean. Maybe it just simply means because the bullet can ricochet, that therefore gives it more total damage since it's ricocheting 10 times as opposed to once or twice. But again, I'm not quite sure. This is definitely something we're going to need to circle back to once we get the full release. But this is what I've been able to observe from my PlayStation with Khvostov and then just combing through this footage. Now, I also tested if there was a way to increase the damage here on Khvostov, and the answer is yes, but also no. I put on one Kinetic Surge mod, which should be netting us a 10% increase in damage. This, of course, works on our base auto rifle shots, and it also increases the damage of our 7th bullet, taking it from 5,690 damage per body shot to 6,259. However, Kinetic Surge mods do not buff our actual ricochet shots, which is super unfortunate. These were still dealing their normal 6,063 to the body and 12,185 to the head, which is a bit of a bummer. It would have been nice here if surges played into the ricochet damage itself, considering literally picking up orbs is literally how you proc the trait here. You could do a 2-in-1, 2 buffs, 1 orb. With that being said though, there were things I didn't get to test. Things like Radiance or even Transcendence giving you that 5% buff. Perhaps those things will bleed into the ricochet damage, but it is very surprising to me that Kinetic Surges did not. Granted, this is a dev build. Perhaps in the main game when this all goes through, surges will in fact bleed into that. Overall though, guys, this is an incredibly fun weapon, and I think it's going to be a pretty good kinetic weapon to use prismatic with, considering it's an exotic primary, therefore it deals increased damage to red bar enemies. This used to be a 40% buff, but they've toned it down to 30% in the final shape. But Khvostov, alongside all other auto rifles, are getting a 15% damage bonus to red bar enemies, which should offset this exotic nerf here. I really do like the play on 7 though. You having every 7th bullet deal massively increased damage, which also ricochets at nearby enemies. And you can increase those amounts of ricochets by just simply picking up an orb of power. And throwing on Shoot to Loot is just an added cherry on top. Now, one thing to remember about kinetic weapons, and we talked about this during our microcosm review, is that kinetic weapons contribute to both light and darkness meters, albeit at a reduced rate. But if you combine this with fragments like Facet of Grace, this reads that damaging targets with kinetic weapons grants you bonus Transcendence energy, and defeating targets with your super grants you and nearby allies bonus Transcendence energy. So there's definitely going to be a play on using kinetic weapons in the final shape. Khvostov will be one of those. Now, we also got to play with it inside of PvP, and I will say I played with it just for a brief amount of time, but just to give you a rough idea of what you're looking at with Khvostov, based on its range, which is 47, damage fall off should begin pretty quickly at 26.6 meters. Now, it's doing 27 damage per crit, 16 damage per body, which puts us right in line with other 600 round per minute time to kill values. At tier 10 resilience, you're looking at 0.8 seconds and 9 crits. Tier 9 resilience to tier 2, 8 crits in 1 body. And from tier 1 to tier 0, 7 crits in 2 body. Again, all of this in 0.8 seconds. Now, what about that 7th shot? Well, the 7th shot will actually bump up to 31 damage per crit, and that body jumping up to 18 damage. Now, again, we're gonna have to run the numbers on this, but theoretically, with that crit damage being increased to 31 from that ricochet shot, Khvostov has the ability to get the kill in exactly 8 crits on tier 5 resilience guardians and below, therefore dropping the TTK value of Khvostov to 0.7 seconds. To be honest, guys, I didn't get to play with it as much inside of PvP. These games in PvP were like very brief, but for the folks I saw rocking Khvostov, it seemed to be doing pretty good. The biggest downside is going to be the weapons range. That one's pretty killer. However, I can also see us running into a Crucible game, proccing things like Reaper, getting an orb off, picking it up, and then just shredding everybody with those ricochet rounds. That's ideally what we want to do whenever the final shape launches, guys, and we really start to test things out completely. What I can say, undeniably, is that Khvostov is substantially better than its D1 variants. I know the Khvostov in D1 had all these variations, and don't get me wrong, that's cool and all, but the potency definitely wasn't there. But for this variant of Khvostov, I think many players, both in PvE and PvP, you're gonna enjoy this one. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.